But my beats, they are hard.
Hello and welcome to the BCSN Sports Wrap. Bryan Fulford and A.D. Drew here, continuing our conversation regarding the MEAC 50th anniversary year. And joining us, MEAC Hall of Famer, class of 2019, Mr. Alvin Hollins. Alvin, good to see you, my brother. Good to see you again.
Good to see you guys again, too.
All right. Drew, how are we doing today?
Oh, we're doing lovely today. Great weekend. The weather affected some people, especially in the Louisiana area. But for us in Georgia and Florida, at least my part of Georgia, everything was great. And speaking of weather, Bryan, and I know you saw the tweet that I put out earlier this week, the unofficial 13th member of the SWAC, McNeese State, because everybody in the SWAC puts McNeese State on their schedule for some reason, and McNeese always beats them. They had pictures of their field flooding on Twitter. They've got multiple inches of water, probably feet of water, due to the latest hurricane that we've had.
Such a savage tweet that you decided to send out there, the unofficial 13th. Technically, they were the unofficial 11th member. Right. They were the unofficial 11th member before FAMU and Bethune joined the conference. So, as we get into this show, we want to remind you if you have not checked out the previous episode with Alvin, we were actually covering and we went through the first 30 years of the MEAC's 50 greatest moments. And so just to recap what we're doing here, we're looking back at every decade of the MEAC 50 years. We're just kind of spotlight a few of the events and encourage you to go to meacsports.com and take a look at the entire anniversary page. You can not only take a look at their events, but you can take a look at the candidates for the individual sport. I guess you can call them the all-time 50 greatest teams. They're putting together a list of football players, volleyball, most recently men's and women's cross country, and they're asking fans, followers, supporters to vote. And I'm assuming what will happen is they will create a 50th list out of this. So we're just kind of starting to break down not only the 50 greatest events, but we're going to, in this episode, begin to talk about the candidates that were on the football list. And there were 149 players that were cited by the MEAC and a combination of athletic sports information people like Alvin, who when he was with Florida A&M, I know Alvin explained a little bit of that process in the last episode. So just want to encourage you to go back and watch that. You can find any of our shows on Spotify, anywhere pretty much where you get podcasts. You can go find us, just search BCSN Sports Wrap. You can download the Jericho Broadcast Network's app. Go to your Google or Apple Play Store, search My BCSN or My JBN, and anytime we put up our shows, they'll be there for you. And of course, you can find us on YouTube via the Jericho Broadcast Network's page. My JBN Online is where we are. And as always, make sure you're following us on Twitter, Instagram, and on Facebook at my BCSN1. Okay, so Alvin, Drew.
Quick question, Brian. Why do you think it was 149 instead of 150? Why such an odd number? I just thought about that.
I have the 150th player who should have been on this list, and we will get into that later. So I don't know why it was 150. Any thoughts on any thoughts on the number of candidates on this list, Alvin?
No, I mean, I actually think looking at how each person's information was presented, I think the conference office went to their records and pulled like people who were player of the year, first team all conference. That's why, for example, with offensive linemen, you probably only have, I don't know if it was 10, 12, 15, maybe, because when you talk about first team all conference is the cutoff. If you don't make first team all conference, you don't make the list. So, and you generally won't have that many first team all conference guys. You may have multiple guys make it multiple years, but you're not going to have a whole lot of guys make first team more than once, because they pick 3 teams, first, second, and third. So I mean, you have to rate pretty high to get first team more than once, which is why once you get past those first 4 or 5 people that have the impressive credentials, then you'll have a bunch of linemen of the year, but they were only first team all conference once, and usually that's their senior year. So that's just kind of the way it panned out. And I think certain positions you just didn't have as many people. So when you add it all up, I think that's how you end up with 149.
Yeah, and trust me, when you have, by my count, 3, 4, 5, 8 different categories of players, wide receivers, running backs, offensive linemen, quarterbacks, special teams, defensive backs, defensive linemen, and linebackers, trying to narrow that down to the top 50 will be tough, and inevitably somebody will get left off the list. And it's just like, if we're all old enough to remember when the NBA came out with their 50th greatest players some 20-something years ago, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know the exact year. I think it was late 90s when that came out.
Like 97, I believe.
Right. There were guys who were left off that list, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, there were guys, I think of Isaiah Thomas being left off the top 50 in that sport but guys like, if I'm not mistaken, Kobe made the list.
Shaq, no, Kobe didn't, Shaq did, and Shaq was only in his second season.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that's a good clarification. Yeah. So inevitably somebody is going to get left off, and it's going to be unfortunate, but when you do these lists, as we stated, it's really about talking about the history. And I think most people will probably get the top 10 to 20 right, and then after that it just becomes you just kind of throw your hands up and say, well, I've got this many guys, and I only got 30 spots.
Well, and also too, you have to consider, you're talking about going back 50 years. So, you look at, some of these positions, you'll see more people from the 2000s, the 90s, and the 80s. But anything, beyond that, I mean, the 70s, I mean, it's kind of almost rare that you'll see a whole bunch, from that era. But I mean, obviously, if they've got if they made all conference, or they got the statistics, you'll be there. But as time has gone by, some of the old records, go by the board, so they kind of drop off. I guess some of the original gangsters, if you will, they just sort of drop off because they just don't compare. Just like this current ridiculous debate between Michael and LeBron. I just think they just need to shut all that stuff down. I think it's just the media is just looking for something to aggravate people about. I think that's all that is.
One's the GOAT, one's the king. Let's just leave it right there.
Well said. Well said. It's interesting also when you look at his 50 years, in the first decade of the conference, you essentially only had 7 schools, maybe 6 or 7 schools. When you get to the last 20 years, you had anywhere from maximum 11 to now you have 9. And that's, or maybe even more than that, really. I mean, if you had anywhere from 9 to maybe 14 at one point, if you include non-football.
We did.
Yeah, so the last 20, 25 years, you inherently have more schools doing things. And so when we get into talking about this top 50 greatest moments, we went through the first 30 years, and there were only 20 items, 20 events listed. Now we get into basically, as you said, AD, we get into the new millennium, the last 20 years, from 2000 forward to present day, and we've got about 30 different events. So let's get into talking about the first 10 years of the new millennia in the MEAC conference, or in the MEAC, I should say. And Alvin, I guess we'll start with you and let you kind of start with your top items. And I know last time we did top 3, but if you've got maybe a 4th in there that you want to make mention of, let's go through and let's hear them.
Well, I mean, if you're going to talk, if we're going to talk the 21st century, I think right off the bat, I have the Norfolk State basketball win over Missouri. That was in 2012.
Well, let's go from the first 10 years, from 2000 to 2009. All right. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll do the last 2 years in its own category.
Okay. Well, if we're gonna go like that, we'll go with Maurice Hicks from A&T. He set the conference rushing record. Actually, it was a national rushing record, 437 yards rushing. Which is a whole lot against Morgan State. That was in 2001.
That came 1 year after Hicks ran for 3-something the year before in 2000, if I'm not mistaken. He owns still to this day has the record for the top 2 single game rushing performances in the MEAC.
Right. Yeah. And then also in 2001, Rasheem Mathis from Bethune-Cookman had led the nation in interceptions with 14. In fact, I think that was the national single season record with 14 picks.
Yes.
Of course, that helped vault him into the NFL. Let's see, and let's go down to 2004. FAMU women's volleyball was ranked in the top 25. They were 28-2 that year, and they finished the regular season ranked 22nd. You know, they beat a number of ranked teams, including Nebraska, who was number 1 in the country at the time. And that was Nebraska's first loss to a non-conference opponent on their home floor in, I think it was like 14, 15 years. and that was in the finals of the Cornhusker tournament. And of course, keeping with 2004, FAMU became the first HBCU to host a first round NCAA, first and second round NCAA event in Gaither Gym. They hosted Stanford, University of Florida, Jacksonville. Of course, Stanford actually emerged out of that regional and went on to win the national championship.
Okay.
So, yeah.
How were the crowds? How were the crowds for that game? If you recall,
I think we drew about 1,500 or so. I mean, it was, you had folks from University of Florida, and we had a nice little contingent all the way from California, which we were kind of surprised at. But it's amazing with some of these sports. They're not big to us, but you go to these larger schools, Penn State, University of Florida, Texas, places like that. It just depends on the sport. Certain things like gymnastics, I don't think any of my HBCUs have gymnastics, but it's huge in the SEC and the Pac-12. I mean, those are almost cult sports in a way, and they'll have huge crowds in their basketball arenas too. So, it just depends on the sport. But volleyball, and that was really at the end of a spectacular run that FAMU had. They won like 9 consecutive conference championships, and I think they won like 90 straight matches. I was trying to think. There was 90 straight matches in conference play, and they won 50 some odd straight matches by 3-0 scores. I mean, so there was a point where they were very dominant. And let's see, I think softball 2005. Need to mention this, and I think this would have to end up in the top 10, I think. Bethune-Cookman softball won the Gainesville Regional, beat University of Florida twice, got the University of Florida coach fired, and then they went to the game. They went to 3 games with the University of Texas in the Super Regionals.
Right.
And that's been the best softball performance by MEAC school. And then there's a couple. Well, I don't know.
Let me go back for a second.
But that's the last one that I have in that first decade.
I wanted to go back and just ask you, as you were talking about volleyball, and I was thinking about the volleyball and that run that Florida A&M had, or even just from what you saw in Bethune in that period of time. Do you feel like the support was what it should have been for the level of success that those teams had at that time?
Well, as far as volleyball, I think, we never had big crowds, in Gaither. I mean, for volleyball, because often, that's during football season. So fans don't turn out as much now. Students did to a certain degree. I think Gaither at that time seated about 3,300. I don't think we ever had more than maybe half for some matches, like if we played Bethune-Cookman, or we never played Florida State. So pretty much had to be Bethune-Cookman, so
still 1,000 people for a volleyball game. That's a good crowd. That's a great crowd.
Right. Well, our teams were really good. They were exceptional, and it was an interesting mix of players. I mean, we had African American players. You know, obviously it was, you know, was predominantly European, because our head coach at the time, Tony Trifonov, was from Bulgaria, and he also recruited really heavily in Latin America, Peru especially. So, and he had some outstanding players, you know, from that area. So he had some recruiting inroads, you know, from overseas, which actually started a trend in the conference, because Eastern Shore started recruiting players from, you know, Eastern Europe and whatnot, and I think several others did as well. I mean, you look at the Olympic sports, for example, you know, you'll see at HBCUs, you'll see more whites, American whites, I guess, and Europeans and foreign players, I guess because, you know, they got because it's easier to recruit those kids because they want to come and get the education and usually get pretty good. Tennis is a sport like that. I know South Carolina State's men, you know, were dominant. Hampton's men in tennis back when they were Division II, and then when they came into the conference, you know, I think it was Dr. Screen, I believe, was the coach, but they had connections into Latin America and Europe too, and so did FAMU, Africa, and Europe and Latin America. It's just something about being able to, and most of those guys come from junior colleges, you know, but either way, you see these other sports where we're not playing, Black African Americans aren't playing in the numbers, and the best volleyball players are obviously going to Penn State, University of Florida, Florida State. So, you know, you may get what you consider second tier talent, or you get them from junior college and you get the international. So now softball, I think Bethune, they did an outstanding job with the support. And Lynn Thompson's, you know, been a great athletic director there. And they had, matter of fact, that coach, she's back there now. She left after that season to go coach at University of Maryland for about 6 or 7 years. And she's a West Coast native originally. So her teams are heavily California.
Right. All right. Drew, all right, let's go to you. Let's hear your list of moments and events from that first decade of the new millennium.
Well, thanks to Brother Alvin over there, my list is shot. Because everything that I had on my 1A and 1B list, Alvin has already named. So I'm only going to add this one event that he happened to leave off his list for some strange reason. I'm going to go to September 3, 2005, which was the inaugural MEAC SWAC Challenge played in Birmingham, Alabama. South Carolina State over Alabama State 27-14. Crowd of 18,452 at Legion Field. So the first MEAC SWAC Challenge, which ultimately led to the Celebration Bowl. So just the first of that type of event as a preseason or early season event at the HBCU level, because most of the time when you had those type of events, they were always postseason bowls. So.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't have the MEAC SWAC Challenge. I guess I didn't find it. I mean, I know it's on the list because it is eventful, but I just didn't.
The first one.
Yeah, but it was like, yeah, it's the first one. I mean, there wasn't. Put it like this.
So it's opened up so many other avenues for both conferences. Because of that, you know, the deal that ultimately, like the SWAC got with ESPN, even though we're talking about MEAC, but it's led to some exposure. Got our conferences on TV a lot more often. You know, ever since the game has been in Atlanta, it's gone to another level. But it had to start somewhere. So let's go back to September 3, 2005, where it started. And ultimately, like I said, it led to the Celebration Bowl, which is the only FCS bowl that's out there.
One of the events on here on the list, and again, anyone you can go see the full list of 50 events. You can go to MEACsports.com, go to their 50th anniversary page. In the year before that first MEAC SWAC Challenge, they have the note on here in 2004, Commissioner Thomas presented ESPN with the idea of a postseason bowl between the MEAC and SWAC champions that evolved into the Celebration Bowl, a game that is televised live. Now, Alvin, help me out with what you know, because the first Celebration Bowl was almost 10 years later.
15, yes.
15 years later, okay.
Well, 2015.
Yeah, but what?
Well, the problem. Well, see, you have to realize the problem was we were still pretty much into the playoffs. I mean, the schools, you look at South Carolina State, Hampton, A&T, FAMU, Bethune, we were still pretty much involved with the playoffs, because now I think the Heritage Bowl was going on at that time too.
That's what I was going to say. The Heritage Bowl was going on, right?
It was going on at that time, but they were just taking representative. Now the SWAC was pretty much sending their champ, because they were not sending anybody to the playoffs,
Right.
But the MEAC often ended up sending this third place team because we had an automatic bid. Yeah. And we had and we were often, and we pretty much got at-large bids as well. FAMU went at large 3 years in a row, 97 through 99. So as a result, you ended up with the third place team. I think it was Hampton 1 year, with Howard 1 year, and those teams ended up winning against the SWAC champ. But I think ultimately, with ESPN, they made it when they finally got it down to agreeing on this game, they stipulated that the champions had to be in the game. And of course they put the money in it, which in this case, I think with the Celebration Bowl, I think the schools actually benefited financially much more than they did from the Heritage Bowl, because the Heritage Bowl, most of the sponsorship dollars went to underwriting the cost of the broadcast and actual operation of the game. So the schools themselves, didn't get anywhere near the payday they're getting now.
Right. Okay. All right. So my list from the decade, I included, and I kind of hesitated at first, but I included March 15, 2001, when Hampton defeated Iowa State.
Right.
As a 15 seed over a 2 seed. Now, we had already mentioned that 4 years earlier, Coppin State had beat South Carolina. So this was at least it was the second MEAC school as a 15 seed to do it. But the reason I highlighted this event, because this was Hampton's first ever Division I basketball tournament appearance. So I just thought, on the level of upsets, to walk into your first, and for Coppin State, this was their third shot in the tournament. When they upset South Carolina, that was their third appearance. But for Hampton to go in on your first shot as the small dog and play Iowa State and beat them, I just thought that was significant enough to include it. I don't know if it'll make the grand list of what was more important or which upset was the bigger upset, but I just thought going in on your first try is pretty significant.
Well, I tell you what, that particular game, the visual of one of the Hampton players picking up Steve Murfeld like a
Yes.
little kid.
Yes.
That's
His
always
legs
gonna,
like,
that's always gonna stick with me.
yes.
You know, because they had
That,
the
that,
big seven. I think that was the big 7-1 guy they had, and he picked up the coach. He went behind and picked him up, and
feet off the
it
ground.
was
Feet off the ground.
right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he ended up getting he ended up parlaying that into a job at Evansville, I think.
Okay.
Murfreesboro. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I too also had the October 6, 2001 performance by Maurice Hicks, the 437. And I also had the 2004 FAMU volleyball rankings, but I included the year prior to that, December 4th, 2003, when the volleyball team registered the first ever MEAC victory in the NCAA volleyball tournament with a 3-0 win over Winthrop. That was the first time that a MEAC school won a NCAA tournament game. And so you as you stated, they parlayed that the following year into beating a number one. And I'm surprised beating a number one Nebraska is not really in the list. You know, it's not on the list, but, you know, maybe it is what it is. But they parlayed that into the following year where they got ranked, they beat number one Nebraska, and they even hosted a regional. So that was pretty significant in my opinion. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think they actually could have done a top one. It might have been better served doing a top 100 because 50 years with the number of teams you had, even though the numbers did kind of, vary from time to time, you know, to pick 50 events. I mean, you're gonna leave some significant accomplishments, you know, on the cutting room floor. It's just no way. And I think I'm not sure they're serving the league well by doing that. But
well, that's why I said the schools have to put out or publish their list of, hey, who were your top 20 or 25 events? You know, everybody submitted a list. The schools need to put their own list out.
Well, see, the schools were limited to 10.
I get it, but I mean, what was that 10? Put that 10 out there, because only, you know, if you go by school, probably maybe your top 4 or 5 made the list. So that means anywhere from 5, 6 to 10 didn't get on the list. I think it'd be great, you know, just a great conversation piece to kind of look back on. And I've got one other event. I also had your softball event that, Alvin, you mentioned from Bethune-Cookman's 2005 season. I included April 12, 2008. Maryland Eastern Shore captured the NCAA bowling championship with a 4-2 win over Arkansas State in the final match, which was televised live on ESPNU. It was the first ever NCAA crown in school history and the first women's national title at the NCAA Division I level by any HBCU team. I mean, that may automatically qualify it into a top 10. I don't know. I know we don't talk about bowling a lot, and maybe some people feel some kind of way about bowling as a sport, but it is recognized, and it's pretty doggone significant in what they did. Anybody have any thoughts or comments on that, or you just like, you can move on?
It actually started a run for UMES. I think they went on to win 3 or 4 more national championships. But there's 2 different championships. There's the NCAA, and then there's one, the Bowling Coaches Bowling Association. In fact, there may be 3. But I know A&T has since won a couple of championships as well. So, but it opened the door for the conference for sure to get into that mix. And that's another sport that we were talking about, the international flavor. You know, we talked about volleyball and tennis and some of those sports, but UMES, their team, with a few exceptions, they were almost all Latin American players. Colombia, I think. In fact, the lady that one of those top players ended up becoming the head coach when the original head coach went into administration full time. So.
Okay. Yeah, I was just thinking.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying it brought my mind back to, I remember when I first heard that bowling was going to be a sport, and that when FAMU built Gallimore Lanes I'm assuming that turned into where FAMU would play their home bowling matches. But I just remember that time period in the mid to late 90s. So go ahead, Drew.
I was going to say, it's ironic that you brought up the bowling, because if we advance on to the next decade, if we're ready, I was going to bring it at the end, but I could start with bowling when we talk about the next decade.
Okay, well, look, let's take a quick break, and I'll come to you to start. You will start the next segment as we get into the last 10 years of content from the MEAC 50th Greatest Moments list. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after these words. You're watching the BCSN Sports Wrap with Bryan and A.D. Special guest Alvin Hollins on this episode. We'll be back right after these words.
It's never too early to plant the seed, to share the tradition, and instill a sense of pride in your HBCU with your little ones. HBCU Pride and Joy Children's Boutique helps you share your school spirit with a wide selection of adorable kids apparel and accessories officially licensed from your favorite HBCU. Visit hbcupridejoy.com and follow us on all social media at HBCU Pride Joy on Facebook and Twitter.
Have you had your Earth Blend coffee today? At Earth Blend Coffee, we take pride in offering you the very best of beans across the world, blended and roasted to perfection, giving you superior quality and satisfying and flavorful taste. Experience the world in one cup with Earth Blend Coffee.
Because the fight isn't over yet.
You will see me choose to protect my community by wearing a face cover.
And even with my face covered,
you will see me.
As a son.
As a man with a never quit attitude.
As a fighter for change.
Join me in wearing a face cover.
To help stop the spread of the coronavirus.
Because this is one small act of kindness
that has the power to make a big difference.
Support the Black College Sports Network so we can continue to provide you coverage. Go to myjbn.com/support and be a part of the Black College Sports Network. Welcome back to the BCSN Sports Wrap. Brian Fulford, A.D. Drew, joined by MEAC Hall of Famer Alvin Hollins, former sports information director at Florida A&M University for about 3 decades. So as we talk about this MEAC 50th Greatest Moments and we get into the various content that we're doing, we can think of no one better than Alvin to join us in talking with us about some of the moments, some of the players that make up this list. So we just got into talking about the first 10 years of the new millennium. Now let's get into the last 10 years, from basically 2010 to present. So let's go, Drew, I'll let you start this time, and let's go to your moments from out of that decade.
So, Brian, it's interesting when you look at this decade, at this list, and before I go to my top moment, if you don't look at the list, you notice most of the events on this list are the Olympic sports and non-traditional sports. I mean, we see track, we see tennis, we see bowling. I mean, you have to go deep down on this list before you even see any mention of football, a football event as a top event in the decade. You got some basketball events early in the decade, but it's more towards the end of the decade when a football event was nominated in the decade. So that, the diversity of the conference and how the conference evolved, whereas in the first couple of decades, everything was basketball and football pretty much, it seemed like, and with a little bit of baseball sprinkled in. So just shows the evolution of the conference. But you closed the last segment out mentioning Maryland Eastern Shore beginning their run in 2008 with their bowling championships. I'm going to go all the way to the end of that run in 2013 when that run came to an end in women's bowling. But during that run, 5 national championships in 6 years. They also won the USBC title in 2011, 2008, 2012, and 2013. And in 2011 and 2012, they also won the NCAA championship. So you're talking a run from 2008 to 2013 when Maryland Eastern Shore not only dominated the conference, but they dominated the national landscape in their sport. So that's my event number 1. And somewhere on the top 50 list, one of these bowling events will have to be there.
Well, what about just including that entire run? I mean, I know this is greatest moments, but do you make an exception when you have a run like that? What are your thoughts?
I do. That's why I went to the end of it because they talk about the run in that bullet point on the 50 greatest moments. They talk about that run, but you actually have to go back and read about some of the other stuff that they did doing it. To win one is tough. To get on a run for a 5-6 year run is remarkable. So, and also you have to keep in mind, this run goes over 2 recruiting classes. So you could get lucky and get a good, in any sport, and get a good recruiting class to take them out for that 3 to 4 years. But to sustain it into a second recruiting class shows the brilliance of the coach and everything else that goes into putting a run together like that.
Okay. What else we got?
My next one is a kind of a personal thing. When I say personal, kind of some people look at it as a blip on the radar, but 30-30 in basketball. 30 rebounds, 30 points. Kendall Gray, March 5th, 2015, of Delaware State, scored 33 points, grabbed 30 boards in a 104-92 victory over Coppin State. Yes, it was over a division opponent, but that's a Division I opponent. They're not playing a Division III or NAIA school when you set these type of records. So Coppin State has the same opportunities and the same amount of scholarships to go out and get players that can play. 30-30, I don't care if it's at the YMCA or in the league, it is astonishing. So, the only person I ever knew that could put up 30-30 on the regular was Wilt Chamberlain. So just to do it one time is remarkable.
Right, definitely.
And my final one is 2017 when A&T goes 12-0 to in Division I HBCU football, FCS. They become the first team to go, first Division I HBCU to go undefeated or untied in football. And they finished the season off with the victory over Grambling State in the before mentioned Celebration Bowl that was thought of all the way back in 2004, 2005, when the Celebration Bowl was was thought of.
Yeah, pretty significant moment there. Going 12-0. I mean, as you just said,
including victories over, I believe, an FBS team during that year.
Yes. Well, that's usually how it has to happen, which doesn't happen too often. I mean, there have been a lot of 11-1, 10-1, or 11-2 teams.
They lose the check game. Let's be real.
You lose the first or second game of the year, which is the check game. But this time, A&T managed to win their check game and then just keep on winning from there. So, all right, Alvin, what's your top moments from the last 10 years?
Well, last 10 years, I would start off in 2012 with that Norfolk win over Missouri. And of course, the center from Norfolk ended up getting drafted. I think he's still in the league now. I think he was drafted by Orlando, and then he spent some years in his hometown of New York. Tariq. Yeah. And in 2016, Tariq Cohen breaks the MEAC career rushing record. And we'll probably talk a little bit more about him later in the show, because he was, he would probably have to be one of the 50 greatest, players ever in conference history.
Oh, without a doubt.
Because those last 2 or 3 years, he was just unstoppable. I mean, the runs he made were just unreal, and he took that same tack into the NFL. In fact, I think even though I was sad to see him get hurt this year with the Bears, but he did get his contract before he got hurt, unlike Dak Prescott. But I really felt like the Bears didn't, they forgot how to utilize him after his rookie year. They didn't really utilize him as much as they should have. I guess they were trying to get the other guy from the state of Carolina more play, and that's Mitchell Trubisky, who I think was a waste. But, we won't go any further into that since he's not a MEAC guy.
All right.
I think really, let me see, I don't think I
love the fact, Drew, I love the fact that Alvin, oh, go ahead, Alvin. I'm sorry.
No, that's it.
Well, no, I was just saying, I love the fact that out of all these events that you can only really be impressed by like 2. It's like, these are the 2 that really stood out of all these things. And I got like all kinds of stuff circled, and Alvin's like, yeah, I got 2. I got 2.
Well, I mean,
that's what 30 years do.
AD took a couple of mine, and we're trying to keep it down to 3. And it was interesting. He mentioned the fact that, you didn't see a lot of the major revenue sports mentioned, other than say Tariq. Most of these were Olympic sports, and I don't know whether that meant that, because we weren't going to the playoffs and we only had the bowl game, and think about some of the stronger teams like FAMU. Those were some bad years for FAMU. FAMU had 6 straight losing seasons in football, which is something that had never happened in their history. But the league, for the most part, it was dominated by A&T, Bethune. And so I guess in some ways it just maybe was kind of down year. Basketball was pretty much, the same. Although the thing about especially men's basketball, that early season schedule usually puts you, usually has you with 10 or 12 losses before you hit the conference. So, you really scrambling and trying to get to 500 overall, and everybody can't get to 500 overall. So,
Right.
So it's tough.
I also find it interesting that in these last 10 years, you see, and I think you mentioned you see more in Olympic sports. And I think it goes to show that as we've gotten into these last 10, 15 years, whether it be training, what do I want to say? Whether it's been training, exposure, coaching, building up of these athletes, you see more of them in these moments where we're competing with the national teams. And I say national brands, and the LSU's, the Texas, the Oregons, USC, whoever you think of as national track and field programs, you see student athletes and teams from the MEAC that are competing. And so, I mean, look, it's a lot of us running at all these programs. So it just goes to show that it speaks to how the schools invested and grew the program.
Right. That's
that you can get. I mean, some of these people probably would have gone 10 years prior, might have gone to another school, a historically white institution, but guess what? They chose to go to an HBCU. And so when it comes out, and so I'll start with one of my
Bryan, I think Alvin hit on it. The fact that coaches started recruiting international more during these latter 20 to 25 years than they may have earlier in the conference. And
but some of these names, Drew, aren't international. I mean, look at some of the.
But when you start thinking about the Olympic sports and some of those dominant teams, those tend to be the non-American players, or even as you've got as some other minorities are coming to the minority school as a minority. The Europeans are starting to migrate towards the HBCUs, and they become the minority on campus instead of us going to the historically white schools and being the minority on campus. So as diversity has become more and more out there, and people have gotten smarter with the recruiting, you're in the internet age, so you can actually see somebody better than you could 30, 40 years ago, where you had to go, if you couldn't read them in the newspaper and get in your car and go see it, you couldn't recruit them. So kind of shows, in my opinion, shows the evolution of recruiting go along with everything else.
Good point. Anything you want to add to that, Alvin?
No, yeah. Well, I think as institutions, a group of institutions, I think we've done a better job of recruiting diverse student bodies. I mean, you look at the offerings we have academically at different schools, and I think they're attracting, whether it's nursing, law, the health sciences, music, different things that I think you're making more of a concerted effort to go after, a wider array of students, because as, especially as the states start scaling back funding, one of the things, they have, one of the stipulations they put on their money is that you had to diversify, your student body and your faculty, which is, I thought was kind of ironic. I said, here we were HBCUs, and then they telling us to diversify. I said, well, y'all gonna get Florida State, Florida to diversify? Shoot, other than football and basketball, I'm talking about, but so that's that, and I think that because the schools have been kind of put on notice, blast, if you will, by the states, they've gone out and been more aggressive, and I think this in general, I know here at FAMU, you run into quite a few people. You see a lot of, I guess, what we call European Americans wearing FAMU gear. Yeah, my child went to pharmacy, or my child to physical therapy, that type of thing. So people are recognizing that, these are outstanding educational institutions. They're great educational traditions. So, and I think, like you said, like AD said, we're doing a better job of being more aggressive about selling our brand.
Yeah.
That's why we're known as historically Black as opposed to predominantly Black.
Great point. All right, here's my 3, and this was very tough. This was tough for me. You guys did have some of mine, so I'm glad I could narrow down my list of 9 to about 3. I'm going to start with March of 2010. North Carolina A&T State women's basketball team did something that no other HBCU program had ever done, winning 2 games in the postseason WNIT. They defeated Wake Forest by almost 30 points, 24 points in the first round. Then they defeated Charlotte by 9 into the Sweet 16. So, look, I know it's not the NCAA tournament, but still, in terms of postseason play,
right?
In terms of postseason play, I think it's pretty significant that they did what they did in 2010. I also went several years later, and I'm going to stay out of the Tariq Cohen thing because Alvin, I was debating between 2 different moments. And so, Alvin, you did grab the one that I was gravitating towards. But how about in 2016 at the Olympic Games in Rio de Janeiro, Mr. Chris Brown, not the singer, of Norfolk State, set a new record by becoming the first athlete ever to run at 5 Olympic Games in the 400 meters. I mean, so think about that. That's a 20-year period in which Chris Brown ran in the 400s. During the same Olympiad, he also set a record by winning his 4th 4x400 meter relay medal. Brown competed in the Olympic Games in 2000, 2004, 2008, 2012, and 2016. So Norfolk State, the pride of Norfolk State, Mr. Chris Brown, definitely that's a tremendous moment there. And then my last moment, my third one, was September 2nd, 2017, Howard University on the road, going to Vegas, taking on UNLV as a 45-point underdog. Now, if you know anything about UNLV football, the fact that UNLV football was 45 points favored over anybody tells you, one, what the bookies in Vegas, thought of Howard. And I think it was an internal joke that they made UNLV a 45-point dog, because anybody that was smart enough probably would have put money on Howard just to cover 45, because there's no way UNLV was good enough to win. But when you are a 45-point underdog, that means the money line pays off pretty nice. So anybody who actually sprinkled some money on Howard to win that game outright, and they did by a score of 43-40, in what became tabbed as the biggest upset in college football history, then you came out with enough money to kind of get you through the entire season probably. But I think in this day and age when sports gambling is growing and it's becoming so prominent in various states, the fact that Howard on that night, and that was the start of the Caleb Newton era, if I'm not mistaken, right?
It sure was. Yeah,
freshman quarterback leading them. I mean, Cam Newton's brother. So Mike London, I mean, did a great job at that program. I mean, it was disappointing to see Kalen leave and what became of Howard just a couple years later. But, you know, we'll see if they get it turned around. But that was just a tremendous moment.
Brian, has UNLV produced anything besides Randall Cunningham?
That's a great trivia question. If you were to ask me what college did Randall Cunningham go to, I bet you 8 out of 10 people would not know UNLV.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing everybody know out of UNLV is Larry Johnson and Greg Anthony.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And Jerry Tarkanian. And Jerry Tarkanian.
Park the shot. But those are the Rebels basketball teams.
Right. All right. So look, we've broken down some of our top moments from the past 50 years, and eventually we will debut our top 10 from that list, and it'll be an interesting conversation and debate, I'm sure, as we'll kind of look at our top moments, and then we'll kind of narrow it down to a top 10. All right, let's take another break, because when we come back, the next segment, it's time to get into the all-time football team candidates list, and there's 149 players. We're definitely not going to do it all on this show. We are only going to be talking about the wide receivers, running backs, and offensive linemen. So that's about just 1/3 of the list of players that are on this list. And then you'll just have to come back and listen to our other shows when we get a chance to talk about the quarterbacks and then on the defensive side of the ball as well. So after the break, we're coming right back with more content, talking about the MEAC 50th anniversary, the all-time football team candidates. You're watching and listening to the BCSN Sports Wrap with Bryan and A.D. We'll be back right after these words.
My God, it's another sad day in America. Painful to be introduced to George Floyd during his last breath with the cop's knee on his neck. On his neck. He deserves so much more.
How many black lives have to be taken before something is done?
We are not a threat.
I am shaking as I type. This has got to stop.
We are sick of it.
We need conviction. I just want us all to live. The death will not stop until the powers that be are finally held accountable.
Don't look away from the truth until every one of us are free from white supremacy.
The world stands with you.
Criminalizing and killing of black and brown bodies is not new. It's as old as America. It's just getting filmed more.
Do you know what it feels like to be hunted? To have a new hashtag for a dead black person every single day? How does one plan a life if they aren't sure they will have a life to plan? Trayvon, Rashonda Anderson,
Deborah Dance,
Megan Clay, Jeremiah Hall,
Michelle Lee
Megan George Floyd. His name was George Floyd. Say his name. Say his name.
George Floyd. Say his name.
Say their names. Once again, and always, we fight for justice. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Rest in power, beautiful. You didn't deserve this.
If I could go back and change it all, I would. I think I'm gonna miss you the most. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Or maybe it's just the little moments. If I could go back and change it all, if I could go back, I would. But I can't.
Care for the house, the kids, and our future. My Shiro's day is never done. So let's save a little more now so we can create the retirement we want. A free 3-minute online chat can give us the personalized tips we need. Visit assureretirement.org/Shiro.
Follow the Black College Sports Network on social media at MyBCSN1, the number 1, on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at MyBCSN1. Welcome back to the BCSN Sports Wrap. Brian Fulford, A.D. Drew here, joined by Alvin Hollins, MEAC Hall of Fame, class 2019, as well as former Florida A&M University Sports Information Director. He was a part of 3 decades of the MEAC 50 years. And so as we get ready to move our conversation into talking about the MEAC football team candidates, these are a list of all the players pretty much that, and I guess, Alvin, let me ask that, and maybe you could briefly kind of tell us what were the parameters around coming up with these lists of players, or as you recall, what were the parameters?
Well, actually, we were never, the sports information directors were never enlisted to submit names for this. I think the conference strictly went with their records in terms of who made, like I said, if you look at the list of first team all conference players or selections were listed. Then of course player of the year, and pretty much that's it. So in other words, if you weren't a first team all conference selection, then you didn't get in. Now there were a couple of guys in that group that were offensive linemen of the year, but they weren't. I don't know if they listed whether they were all conference. That might have been quarterbacks, but generally that's the cutoff. And with offensive linemen, you're not going to have, more than maybe a dozen or so, athletes, that make first team. I mean, and when I say that, I mean multiple first teams, because they pick 3 first, second, and third teams. So generally, unless you're really, really outstanding from your freshman year on, usually it takes until your junior or senior year for you to crack that first team level.
Right, and so we're going to start with the offensive linemen. We've got about 20 names that were selected on this list. Most of them are tagged as offensive linemen, but then we have a few of them that are tagged as offensive guards and offensive tackles. So I'm assuming you probably, if you really want to do a deep dive and say, hey, what position did this guy play, you can go do that. But for the most part, their main category is offensive linemen. Among the list of 20, I just thought it should be noted, six guys came from South Carolina State, 4 guys came from Hampton, Florida A&M had 3 players, and North Carolina A&T State had 2. Bethune, Howard, Morgan, Norfolk State, and Dell State each had 1 representative from the list of 20. I'd also make a note that only 1 player, one offensive lineman, is actually a part of the MEAC Hall of Famer, and that's actually a gentleman from your class, Alvin. And I hope I don't mess this name up. He went to Howard. Mpume Masamini.
Right, you got it.
Class? Yeah, he went to Howard. He was part of your class. He was the only.
Ding, 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 ding.
He was the only. I got the name right. Yeah, he was the only Hall of Famer that made this. Who's currently a MEAC Hall of Famer. He went to Howard. He's the first team in 2003. One other note that I thought I would bring up. You mentioned all conference and offensive lineman of the year, which is a category that the MEAC has. They actually have an offensive lineman of the year category. There were 5 guys who were first team all conference 3 consecutive years. There were 2 guys who were first team all conference 2 consecutive years. So that's 7, but the other 13 guys really only appear on that conference, all first team conference list 1 time. And of course, I think the list is highlighted by 3-time MEAC Offensive Lineman of the Year, Brandon Parker, who was at A&T, North Carolina A&T State from 2015 to 2017, he being the only 3-time Offensive Lineman of the Year. And as I look at my spreadsheet here, I don't know. Yeah, I don't think anybody else, there was never even a multiple winner. He was the only multiple winner of that award. And I would say, Alvin, that's probably an award that didn't come out or start until the late 90s. Is that to your best of your knowledge?
That's correct. And of course, Mr. Parker had the benefit being the front man for Tariq Cohen. So that probably didn't hurt his case much. You know, when Tariq is mashing potatoes and breaking ankles and stuff, you know, they said, well, somebody had to spring this guy loose. So, you know, so when you put him in, they said, okay. And generally, that's how linemen are kind of voted on, because they don't, like you say, they don't have statistics in terms of individual. So how the team does offensively, do they give, you know, that pretty much gives people an indication of maybe the quality of work that they did.
Yeah, and I would add, I don't feel like enough people pay attention to offensive line play. I've always maintained that there's no group. I mean, when you think about just the sheer numbers, the number of offensive linemen on your roster they're probably the largest group on your team in terms of numbers, because you at least have a first and a second group. So that's a minimum of 10. You probably have a few other guys. So you could probably have anywhere from 10 to 15 offensive linemen on your roster. You know, so and then that even translates into going in the professional ranks. But most people don't know how to grade offensive linemen. And if you stated, Alvin, that they used to have the coaches offer grades, but I would imagine most media people don't know what somebody graded at. I mean, unless you just happen to see a guy pancake block 3 different guys in a quarter, then you probably write down your notes like, oh wow, he just caked this guy like 3 different times. Or every time Cohen's running through a hole, oh, there's Brandon Parker, you know.
Well, the conference made adjustments to its all-conference balloting probably in the last 15 years or so, and they started adding more statistics, you know, for statistics lines for every athlete, including offensive linemen. I guess whether they were, because they pick on there's a lineman of the week selected. It's like there's an offensive player, defensive player, special teams player. There's an offensive lineman of the week selected. And the grades from those coaches are often included in the nominations every week. So all that stuff is compiled at the end of the year. So the folks who grade the highest usually end up on the all-conference team. So
yeah. All right, let's go through now. What we're going to do in this segment is we're just going to spotlight maybe 4 or 5 guys, because obviously if you go to MEAC, anybody who goes to MEACsports.com, you can actually vote on the players that you want to be part of your 50, or who you want to see be a part of the MEACs. I'm assuming they're going to do a 50 greatest players, but if you only got 5 guys to choose from out of this list, Alvin and Drew, who are you choosing? Let's go that route, because we could be here all day talking about offensive linemen. But
I actually had I have 4 or 5. I think I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Jelani Clement of Hampton. I think he was 3-time first team all conference, and he was offensive lineman of the year in 2004. Johnny Culbreth of South Carolina State, I remember him because that's when they had some of those great running backs that were terrorizing everybody. He was 3-time first teamer, 08, 09, 10, and he was the offensive lineman of the year in 09. And then we had Raymond Harrison, also South Carolina State. He was a rookie of the year in 06. He was first team all conference 06, 07, 08, and offensive lineman of the year in 08. I don't know what happened to him in 09, or maybe he left early for the NFL. Let's see. Then I had Brandon Parker of A&T. who was the offensive lineman of the year 3 times, 15, 16, and 17. Obviously, first team all conference each of those years. And the other guy that I checked off was the current head coach at A&T, Rod Milstead. He was a guard. I think he actually played with the 49ers or the Redskins, the old Redskins. But he was 3-time first team all conference, 89, 90, and 91. So those would be my top 5 picks as far as that goes, because like I said, there aren't too many multiple first teamers, which is usually that's usually your senior year, unless you're just exceptionally good on an exceptionally good offensive team.
Just recap that for me. You had Clement, Culbreth, Parker, Milstead, and who was the other one?
Raymond Harrison, South
okay.
Carolina State.
Gotcha. Okay.
And Brandon Parker.
Right. Okay. I think of your list as I was jotting notes. Now, what I'm about to say, I'm pulling from off of the MEAC record boards. So if I say something, folks, and I'm wrong, just send a comment. Don't beat me up too bad, because I'm pulling this information off the MEAC record books. Johnny Culberth was the only one, outside of Parker. Parker was drafted in the 3rd round by the Vegas Raiders in 2018. Milstead was a 5th round draft pick of the Dallas Cowboys, the 9th pick of the 5th round.
Okay.
Culbreth was a 7th round pick in 2011 by Detroit. And according to the information I saw, now maybe these gentlemen had playing careers in the CFL, but those are the only 3 who had NFL playing careers, or at least were drafted in the NFL. All right.
Okay.
Yeah. So Drew, who's your crop? Who's your group?
I'm just going, for the lack of redundancy, I'm going to add a couple of names to that list. But first of all, no offensive lineman in the MEAC or in any of the Hall of Fames, including the MEAC Hall of Fame, Black College Hall of Fame, or NFL Pro Football Hall of Fame.
No, there is one. There's one MEAC Hall of Famer. That's the guy in Alvin's class.
Okay. It's not, not listed on this sheet here. I'm going to go with, I'm going to be a homer on this one, Brian. I'm going to go with 2 guys I actually saw play when I was on the Hill. I'm going to go with Jamie Nails and Lamont Turner, who were at FAMU when I was at FAMU, and I actually saw these guys play. So those would be the only names that I would add to the list that Alvin.
Yeah, because Nails actually played with Buffalo. He was drafted by Buffalo.
Right.
He ended up with Miami. He ended up with Miami before, as we used to say, he ate himself out of the league.
Yeah.
And I should talk about eating himself out of the league, but he was I think he was 6'7", about 360. But I mean, as a left tackle, I remember us playing A&T. This was Billy Joe's first year. This was '94. We went up there. It had and they got locker rooms and stuff now. They got that big field house in the north end zone where they have locker rooms for the visiting team. Before the teams had to dress, they put tents up in the field behind the visiting grandstands, and it had just rained really bad, so you got mud and everything. It wasn't nice. So Billy Joe said, "Gentlemen, we got to make these guys pay. They're gonna make us, they're gonna make us be in mud, and we're gonna have to give it back to them. And they ran the football. I remember that. I remember the time of possession was like 42 minutes for FAMU. I mean, they just basically pounded A&T in the submission. And it wasn't like 70-0, but it was just, they just ran the clock. They just pounded them, So it was something. That 42 minutes time of possession. I'll never forget that one.
Yeah, Jamie, you mentioned that Jamie Nails was a 4th-round draft pick in '97 by Buffalo, then went on to Miami. Lamont Turner, I believe, was an undrafted. He in '98 went to Arizona. I don't think he was drafted. Went in as an undrafted. So that was the back-to-back years that FAMU had the offensive lineman of the year. Nails in '96, Turner in '97. Yeah. Okay, so for my list, I will include a name or two. I mentioned earlier that so you covered the three. Essentially, Alvin, you covered the guys who were the 3-time all-conference. I'll include 2 guys who were the multiple all-conference selections. That's Josh Harrison from South Carolina State from 06 to 07. Now, Alvin, you tell me, was there any relation between Josh and Raymond Harrison?
I don't know for sure.
Okay.
But I know South Carolina State, they offensive and defensive linemen and linebackers and running backs, they seem to be able to recruit those, it was almost like they had some kind of revolving door with those guys, especially the linemen. I mean, they were just, that's why their running game was so effective. And the defense was effective as well because they were able to stop the run and apply tremendous pressure. So we'll talk about that when we talk about defense.
Yeah. Raymond Harrison was the offensive lineman of the year in 08. Josh Harrison was a 2010, according to the information that I pulled up from the MEAC's superlatives page. And he was a 2-timer. I don't know whether now he was a 2-timer right around the same time as Raymond Harrison. But anyway, you got to imagine if you had Josh and Raymond Harrison leading the way for the running game, and we'll find out about the running back during that period shortly. My other name would be Clyde Reed. He also of South Carolina State. Now just think about 2006 for South Carolina State, where you had Clyde Reed, who was a 2-time first-teamer in 05 and 06. You had Josh Harrison in 06, and then you also had Raymond Harrison in 06. So, I mean, that period right there we already mentioned was just awesome for South Carolina State. And according to the notes that I saw, I don't have any of these gentlemen having a career in the NFL. Although, James Lee, who was also part of that group, he, the offensive lineman of the year in 2007, Lee was there at the same time with these guys. He actually played 4 years in the league from 08 to 2012 with Cleveland, Tampa Bay, and Washington. So kind of interesting how that works. And I will just leave this one final note here about the offensive lineman pool. 6 players from the MEAC's candidate list either were drafted or played in the NFL. Now, according to the MEAC record books, and they list all of the players who had a cup of tea in the NFL, 14 players that were not on this list were drafted in rounds 4 through 7. So we talk about how tough and how interesting it is when you think about the offensive lineman category. 14 drafted guys were not part of the all-time football list. And like you said, Alvin, I mean, I'll have to do a deeper dive to see were these guys actually first team, second team. I don't think any of them were offensive linemen of the year, and so maybe that's why they didn't make this list. But and also, how long were they in the NFL? I mean, maybe that's a factor to consider. It's real interesting to see how we come up with the list for the offensive linemen of the 50 years.
Well, that's probably the hardest position to grade because you don't have, traditional statistics, so you really almost have to kind of interpret or project how good they are based on the offense. You got a strong running game, don't give up a lot of sacks, that kind of thing, or the passing. You got one of the leading passers in the conference. So they don't get, other than maybe pancake blocks or high grades from the offensive coaches, they don't get a whole lot of in the way of statistics, So, and I think with the pros, as you mentioned, there are a number of those guys that didn't seem to rate that high based on this list. The pro scouts, they come and watch practice. They'll watch game film or game tape, and they'll and of course coaches will talk up certain players as well. Because obviously, like you said, everybody's not going to make first team all conference, but coaches know who has the skills that might translate to the next level. So, with South Carolina State, maybe A&T, they probably did a better job of talking their guys up to pro scouts.
All right. Let's transition now over to the wide receiver position. There were 11 players listed that were wide receiver, or they have a category obviously split in and these guys were from the 70s, obviously before the category or before the position changed over from wide receiver. It was always a split in. So we're just going to include the split in players, 2 of them, with the wide receivers, 9 of them, to give us a total of 11 players from out of this era, 50 years. The school breakdown goes like this: FAMU with 3 players, Howard with 3 players, North Carolina A&T State had 2, Delaware State had 2, Hampton had 1. There were 7 players that were in the NFL, either as a drafted player or an undrafted free agent. 6 wide receivers were the offensive player of the year in the MEAC during their time. One of them was actually a 2-time offensive player of the year. 4 players out of this list are currently in the MEAC Hall of Fame, and 1 player off this list is currently in the Black College Hall of Fame. All of the guys in this list were all MEAC at least 1 time. There was only 1 player on this list who was a 4-time MEAC first-team player, and there are 2 players who were 3-time first-team all-MEAC players. So, Drew, I will start with you with the wide receivers. And obviously there's only 11 guys here. So how about we just narrow it down and say, who are your top 3?
Well, for me, and I hope I don't sound like a homer here, I have to take Jaquay Nunley. If I'm going to start a team in this conference, I have to take the 4-time first-team all-MEAC player and put him out there. I was not there on the hill, but I did come to a homecoming game or 2 and saw this guy perform. And he was something special. I think you were on your way out the door, but you saw some of those record-catching years during your time on the hill there, Bryan. John Taylor of Delaware State would be my next one. We know what he did in the NFL, but it all started at Delaware State. So that would be my next one. And the third one is, it's tough. Because do I go with the recency or do I go with the history? And I'm going to stay with what I've been doing. I've been going historical. And I saw this guy play when I was at FAMU, Cherry Mickens. He was something special back in the day. And that's back when Ken Riley was the head coach at FAMU. So Cherry Mickens would be my third one.
Hey, Alvin, tell us about what do you recall about John Taylor? Because he was the first teamer. He was a first teamer for 2 years. He was an offensive player of the year in '85.
I guess John Taylor was a wide receiver on a team that basically ran the wing T. So they were more kind of run, misdirection type things. But, you know, I was telling folks when he, you know, you think about John Taylor, Bill Walsh paired him up with Jerry Rice, 49ers. They were on the same team together. So can you imagine the twin terrors from the HBCU, you know? And speaking of Jerry Rice, Nunnally broke Jerry Rice's 1AA record, single season record for reception.
Yes.
It was 318. He broke that against Southern his senior year. Now, the NCAA used to only count regular season statistics. They didn't include postseason. Because if you'd included postseason, I think Nunnally ended up with almost 350 catches total. Because, you know, we went playoffs every year. He was in school. But yeah, that, you know, that black college connection, you know, between the three of those guys, I mean, you got the greatest, some people say he was the greatest football player in NFL history, and that was Jerry Rice. So, you know, that's some pretty tall cotton to be in, to have those two, Taylor and Nunnally, you know, to be mentioned in the same breath, you know, with Jerry Rice.
Yeah. So who is your three? I got a feeling Nunnally is included in your three there, Alvin.
Well, he would have. Tracy Singleton, going back history from Howard, I remember him. You know, I go back to '79, so he was a 3-time offensive player of the year, and he was dynamic wide receiver for the Bison. Yeah, I did have Taylor and Nunnally, but as a guy that was kind of close, special in my heart, was Ray Alexander, FAMU. Ray Alexander played 80 to 83, and now he was a wide receiver on a team coached by Rudy Hubbard, who believed in running the option. But probably argue, you know, now I tell you what, now we're talking about top plays and top this and that. If there was a top 10 plays for catches all time in the conference, he would probably have 2. Both of them were against South Carolina State. He had one in 1981. We lost that game 21-19, but he made a catch in the back of in the corner of the end zone over 2 defensive backs. And they had front coverage on him. He was an All-American in basketball, by the way. So he could jump. Didn't have great speed, but he could jump. And he made a spectacular catch on ABC. And I can still see Barney Bussey, who ended up in the NFL, and one other guy trying to wave the officials off. Said, no way he caught that ball, but he was a great athlete. Ray Alexander. In fact, he was an All-American, 1AA All-American as well. So,
who was Singleton's quarterback at Howard? Because Howard did have, obviously Howard has two of the more well-known, actually two or three very well-known quarterbacks, but I don't think.
I'm trying to think. If I'm not mistaken, I'm thinking it was Steve Wilson.
Okay.
See, Steve Wilson, Steve went to the NFL as a defensive back, surprise. But I think he was the quarterback. Steve Wilson was the quarterback during that time. Yeah, that's who it was. It was Steve Wilson.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. I was scanning the list here to see if Steve made the list as a quarterback.
No,
he's not. He's a quarterback.
He didn't make it. No.
Okay, so my three were Nunnally, Singleton, and Ray Alexander. So I think it sounds like we pretty much all, I thought about Mickens, but when I had to go between Mickens and Alexander as the FAMU receivers, I went with Alexander, who was a 3-time first-team All-MEAC player. And even Mickens got drafted, if I remember now. Mickens was, if I'm not mistaken, he got drafted by the Packers, right?
Packers, right, yeah.
Right, so drafted by the. And I think that's sort of the interesting thing. Mickens might have been the only one. Let me see. I know Taylor, obviously, we know he went to the NFL. Nunnally,
no, he didn't.
Did not. No. And Singleton, did Singleton go?
No, I don't. Yeah,
I don't. I'd have to look at. I don't know, Drew, if you're able to look at if you've got the MEAC record book open. It's there in the last page. But I will say this: I went through and I just the greatness of Jaquay Nunnally. And you talked about. We'll talk about another guy who, when we talk about guys who will automatically be top 10, Jaquay Nunnally will definitely be top 10. He still holds several records for the MEAC. He, in terms of total receiving yards in a career, he's still number one, 4,245. In a season, Nunnally had the number 2, number 7, and the number 11 season in the record book. Receiving yards in a game, he now holds number 2 at 289 yards, which that was in 97. And when at the time he broke the previous record of 230 that had stood for almost 17 years. Nunnally is number 1 in total receptions career. He's number 1 and 2 total receptions in a season, total receptions in an individual game, tied for number 1, touchdown receptions in a career, number 1. And what's funny though, Alvin, in the 3 great years that Nunnally had, 97, 98, 99, the offensive player of the year was his quarterback. Oteman Sampson, Pat Bonner, and Jawan Sider, all respectively, were the offensive player of the year. Nunnally never won the MEAC offensive player of the year.
No, never did.
Tragic. That is like one of the. Somebody should have made him a co-offensive player of the year.
Well, that's see, to me, in the conference, I had that conversation with Connell Maynard, who's now the head coach at Alabama A&M, but he was the offensive player of the year in 90 and 91 as a quarterback for Bill Hayes at A&T. When FAMU had Tony Ezel under Ken Riley. And I think from passing standpoint, Ezel was superior. But I really felt that the offensive player of the year was really an MVP award because, without Maynard, A&T didn't do a whole lot. I mean, he was just a creative. He had mobility. Could throw. He was basically a guy who could. What do they call it? What do they call those guys now that can run and pass?
Dual threat option.
Dual threat. Yeah, he was
right.
a dual threat option. So he really made them go, and I understood why he was player of the year. But that's why I'd always kind of pushed for them to come up with a most valuable player, because I think that in the end he was the most valuable. But as far as offensive player, I felt that that Ezel should have won that, but it didn't happen.
One other thing before we move on, it's also interesting. This category is the second smallest category of all of the position groups. I mean, and it is only by 2 players larger than the special teams group. I mean, the special teams group have 9 players in it. This wide receivers split in group, they're 11. So I think that's kind of interesting when you think about the history of the league, that the receivers are so few.
Well, that's because the league transitioned from being primarily a run heavy defensive style to more wide open. I still say that 98 season was one of the greatest offensive years really in college football history, especially 1AA, because if you think about it, 98, that was Pat Bonner's 1 year. FAMU led 1AA in total offense, scoring offense, and passing offense. And he and Ted White had I call it the Wild West shootout in Jacksonville. They both threw for over 500 yards in that game. 61-49, I think, was the final. FAMU won. But, Bonner, I think Ted threw for 561. Bonner threw for 602, something ridiculous. When you go back and look at it. We got behind on the stats in that game on the computer. So, we were scrambling the entire game thanks to Ed Hill. I'd still be in Jacksonville trying to calculate that stuff, because every time I would type something, somebody scored again. So we managed to get through it, but those were some fantastic years, and there's a guy that's not on that list, that receivers list, is Canaan Lamb, the guy that probably should be on that list. Right. In 98, he and Nunnally both finished with over 1,000 yards receiving. At that time, they were like the 12th duo in NCAA history to have 1,000 yards in the same receiving in the same season. And he made some spectacular plays for us, because people had started focusing on Nunnally last couple of years. But Lamb made some huge catches for us as well. Of course, that Rack Boys crew, that's 4 receivers, we had really 5. I mean, that was probably as talented a receiving group, as the league may have seen, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, it makes for some interesting, especially some interesting conversation about players who didn't make this list. And so definitely Lamb being one of them. Let's jump over to the running back position now, where there are 19 players that made the all-time football candidates list in the running back position. North Carolina A&T State had the most with 5. South Carolina State had 4. FAMU had 3. Hampton and Howard had 2 each. And North Carolina Central, Del State, Morgan had 1. Bethune-Cookman had none. Thought that was kind of interesting when you just think of the Bethune-Cookman offense. But we'll get in. I think they definitely have it covered in the quarterback position. They've got a few guys there. Among the first-team all-conference guys, you have, interesting enough, you have two players that were four-time first-team all-conference guys, Tariq Cohen and Alonzo Coleman of Hampton.
Right.
You had two guys who were three-time first-team all-conference guys. You had William Ford at South Carolina State, and then you had Michael Hicks at South Carolina State. And then you had there were about five guys who were two-time first-team all-conference players. There are three MEAC Hall of Famers that are among this group, including Ricky Anderson, who was at South Carolina State in 1977. He of the class of 2010. You had, let me make sure, Gene Lake, 2009
right.
MEAC Hall of Famer. He was at Dell State from 83 to 84. Well, at least those were the years he was the two-time first-team all-MEAC player. And then you had George Ragsdale, Hall of Famer, class of 2007. He was at North Carolina A&T in 1975. So sort of that history there of North Carolina A&T is pretty dominant. And before you give your top five, I don't know who goes, I've lost track on who goes first. I will say it's interesting that among this group, this is how tough this running back group is. The career yards gained in the record book, you have the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, or excuse me, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 7 are all on this candidate list. Number 6 is not. And that is a conversation we can have at the end there, because I think it's a shame that he didn't make the list. But all right, who goes first, Drew or Alvin?
I'll take it because I'm gonna leave mine with. I'm just gonna give you one name. And
come on, you can't just put one name.
Oh, I'm trying to conserve time because I want to leave something for you guys to talk about. I'm just gonna take mine off the top.
All right.
I'm like the dope man. I gotta take it off the top.
Yeah, all right.
Tariq Cohen.
All right.
It all starts and stops with Tariq Cohen as far as I'm concerned. The top two single game performances in history, 4-time MEAC first teamer, offensive rookie of the year 2013, offensive player of the year 2014, 2015, and 2016. How much better can you get than Tariq Cohen? If you give me one, that's my one.
Yeah, no. You got it. You got it. I mean, Cohen's stats are there's only 3 players in the MEAC who've ever won the Player of the Year award. He's one of 2 that have won it 3 times. Nobody has ever won it more than 3. And he's one of 2 guys, and rightfully so. His numbers are pretty outstanding. So that I'll throw that over to you, Alvin. How do you? If I only gave you 3 guys, obviously it seems ridiculous, but I can give you 5. If you had to take 5, who are 5 guys that you would take and put them in your list?
Well, I mean, if Alonzo Coleman would be, obviously Cohen is out for me, but Alonzo Coleman for sure. Let's see, William Ford from South Carolina State. He was pretty devastating. And then I had the Hicks boys, one from Michael from South Carolina State, and Maurice from A&T. And Maurice Hicks was a guy that had tremendous burst of speed. I remember him running like an 80-yard touchdown on FAMU. He took a pitch to the outside. He looked like he was running the 100-meter dash. I mean, our guys were just like, it was like watching a tennis match. Whoa, you know, so, and then my fifth person would be, did we mention Gene Lake?
Just only mention him in the fact that
he's a Hall of Famer.
He's a Hall of Famer.
Right. Well, Gene Lake would be on my list, as well as Amir Rasul from FAMU. He was Player of the Year, 2-time first team All-Conference. In fact, he's in the top 5 all-time in rushing for FAMU.
What do you recall about Lake and then Rasul? What do you recall about those two? As those two are sort of the oldest on this list in terms of, you know, 30 plus years from today.
Well, Rasul was under Riley. So we were running a standard, you know, tailback type offense, and you know he ran hard between the tackle and had a great burst of speed. In fact, his son Amir Jr. or Amir II briefly played over at Florida State. So I don't know if I think he still had a year or two left eligibility, but he was, you know, and he was great receiver out of the backfield. And the other guy, Gene Lake, back in, I think he was in the 80s. Yeah, he was in the 80s. That's when Delaware State, they hired the first white coach in the conference, Joe Perzicki. He was a high school coach in Delaware, and he brought in and of course the University of Delaware, you know, they had they pretty much come up with what they call the wing T. That was their offense, and it was people ran variation of it. Eddie Robinson ran it too, but Gene Lake was just he was one of those guys. He could break, contain, and just go the distance coast to coast. You know, for the longest, he was the all-time rusher in conference history. I know he's probably still in the top 4 or 5, maybe. You know, maybe not now, because these guys, Coleman and the Hicks brother, the boys, I should say, some of those guys came along later, and Tariq pretty much probably pushed them way down. But for a number of years, probably into the 90s, he stood as the all-time leading rusher in the conference. Had great speed, great burst, and then that wing T, which has a lot of misdirection. You know, he was great, you know, as a receiver out of the backfield as well.
If you can recall, I'm not going to ask who. The easy question, a lot of these guys were outstanding running backs, and you think of the top 5. When you think back, which guy did FAMU have the most success stopping? If there was one among the top 5 or 6 guys on this list, and if you can recall,
the most success stopping,
right? Because I imagine all of them had good games, probably.
Yeah, they all had good games. I don't know.
Let me say slow down. Maybe stopping is the wrong word. How about containing or slowing down, knocking off their average? However you want to categorize it.
I don't know. Maybe I think the one we had maybe the most success against was Ford. I think a couple times we played and we banged them up. We beat them up pretty good. In fact, one year I know he was not 100%, but we played him. So, you know, that was probably the one guy we kept under his average, because most of those guys coming in were averaging right at 90 or 100 yards a game. I know Alonzo Coleman put on a clinic his senior year against FAMU. I think we lost to Hampton 59-0. And you know, he had some of those coast to coast runs you see on ESPN. Like, okay, can we do something to trip the guy? Anything, you know, blowing his ear or something, boy, because it was bad. I mean, you know, and the funny thing about that particular game, that was Reuben Carter's first year, I think. I think it was his first year as head coach.
Oh, there's a name I had forgotten.
Right. But the funny thing was that in the post game, Alonzo Coleman and that great linebacker they had, Justin Durant, they walked into the locker room. They still had their pads on and stuff. Here comes Joe Taylor. Joe Taylor looks like a little boy. I'm looking at these guys. I'm like, damn, no wonder no wonder we got killed tonight, because these guys they both looked like they might have been 6'2" or 6'3", you know, with the pads and everything. They was just impressive, physical, specimens, really. So, you know, Taylor did a tremendous job at Hampton, you know, so.
And Justin Durant was the other player who was the only other 3-time player of the year in the MEAC. So you had Cohen on the offensive side, and Justin Durant from 04 to 06 was the linebacker. And so those are the only 2 3-time players of the year, offense or defense. Yeah. Right. So I just imagine that Hampton team in 06 was pretty nasty.
Oh, yes, they were.
Yeah. Okay. So you guys covered all the guys that I had. I'm just going to quickly mention the one guy who's not on this candidate list, and I don't know how he didn't make this list. I'm going to make the argument for why he should have been on this list. All right. So in the yards gained of career, I mentioned that you got Tariq Cohen at number 1 with 56.19. William Ford at 46.72. You had Alonzo Coleman at 46.48. Harvey Reed is still holding on at the 4 spot with 41.42. Michael Hicks of South Carolina State with 4,093 yards. This gentleman comes in at number 6 with 3,838 yards. Played at Hampton from 97 to 2000. I'm talking about Montreal Coley.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
Montreal Coley's 2000 season. Listen to this 2000 season. He was a first-team All-MEAC player. He had 1,582 total yards that year, which at the time was the 3rd best single season in the conference. It is now 4th. Only one other has gone above him. He averaged 143.8 yards per game in only 11 games. There have been some guys who have had 12 games, namely, Cohen, but that is 4th overall. Coley, to this day, still has the most total carries in a season, 307. He also has the most touchdowns in a season, 27. He also has the most points in a season at 172. And he's 28 points ahead of whoever has number 2. I didn't keep the name down. He's 40, at the time, he was 40 points ahead of whoever was there. And one of the highlight games of that season was a 253-yard performance against Morgan State. At the time, it was the 7th best single performance. You know what's so funny about that day, Alvin, I don't know if you can remember this, November 18th, 2000, it was the same day Maurice Hicks set the record for the best single game in the conference with 353. Coley dropped 253 at the time, which was 7th best. Surprisingly, though, the offensive player of the year that year was quarterback Rashawn Matthews of Delaware State. So, Alvin, how is Montreal Coley not on the all-time football team list of candidates?
Well, again, I think it goes to, I don't know with those numbers, and you think he would have been in that list, but you see and I kind of knocked the MEAC office a little bit because they didn't really enlist the SIDs to select players. Because I mean, this guy, he's got to be one of, after Coleman, he's probably you got to be at least 2 or 3 all time on the Hampton list. So I would certainly think, you know, he would have been nominated. So
he's definitely number 2.
I don't know.
He's number 2 on the Hampton list, easily.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. I don't know. I know they didn't enlist us to nominate folks because, you know, I think I would have put in, you know, for Lamb and a couple of other people. You know, it's just what I guess when you've got all those years, schools and history, sometimes people fall through the cracks, but I can't imagine how he could have fallen through the cracks if the school had nominated. So,
well, what's funny about that, when you look at the list as a whole, I counted 4 guys who were Rookie of the Year was really their only accolade. Never, you know, no first team, no, you know, now they may have other stats, but in there, but there are 4 guys. I'm not going to call names. Anyone, you can go look at the list and figure out. But there are 4 guys who are Rookies of the Year only, you know, and one of them is still playing. So I don't know how he, you know, but I'm like, Montreal Coley got screwed. I'm just going to put it out there. He got screwed on this list, and you know, you know, who knows? Maybe somebody will hear this and retroactively change to add him to the list, but I'm just going to put it out there. He got screwed. Drew, any thoughts? Am I wrong? Right? Wrong? What do you say?
I echo your sentiment exactly because I was not aware of those numbers at that level.
Yeah.
And you know, it makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
I think the conference office went through their records. Although with his numbers, you would have thought he would have made the list. But you know, I think what they did, they looked at the all-star listings, all conference. How many? I mean, as far as I know he wasn't offensive player of the year. But did he make first team? He should have at least once or twice.
In 2000. Well, no, 2000 I think was his only year that he was a first team All MEAC. 2000.
Okay. Well, shoot.
But still, in terms of career yardage, though, he is number 6 on the list. And at the time when he finished, he technically was number 3 because after him came Alonzo Coleman, William Ford, and Tariq Cohen. They came after him. So at the time that he finished, he was number 3 on the MEAC list.
Right. Well, I mean, and that was one of the reasons I mentioned in the previous broadcast that I was a little disappointed that they did not put career statistics. I mean, where available, let me put it that way, you know, because to me, when you got that many people on a list and you're going to try to ask folks to select, they're going to go on name recognition, obviously, if they're fans, but eventually when that list is finalized, you like to be able to say this person had, you know, so many touchdowns or whatever the case may be. That Coley had 27 touchdowns in one season.
27 in one season.
Man, that is.
Yeah. Hey, look. So this is a memo to the Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference. Hey, we love what you've done, but if there's any way, any late addition or even a write-in space for Montreal Coley, I need Team Hampton. I need Hampton Pirates. Get out there and let the MEAC know how in the hell does Montreal Coley not end up on the all-time football team candidates list? I'm just looking at the list. I'll make sure I didn't overlook his name on this list.
I didn't see it.
Nope, it's not on the list. Okay, so I'm within my rights to say somebody screwed up. All right, so there it is. But all right, so there's one little controversy that we plucked out of this thing. I'm sure we'll have some other ones that maybe we can dig up. All right, so look, when we come back, when we do another show, our next show, we will get into probably strictly quarterbacks in the special teams unit, because there are 30 quarterbacks in that list, and I think it'll be a fascinating debate on trying to figure out how you measure up the guys who had great individual seasons versus the guys who had good careers, because there is a group on both sides. We have, and you mentioned it, you've got the Pat Bonner single season, but you've also got the career year of a guy like Ted White, Jay Walker, Patel Troutman, Alan Suber. I mean, those are just guys that are coming off in the top. Ryan Stanley. I mean, I'm just going off the top of my head of career guys versus single season guys. And so that'll be an interesting debate for another show. But that's going to do it for this episode. Again, if you have any comments or thoughts, make sure to leave them. If you're watching us on YouTube, like and subscribe. If you're on Facebook, leave a comment as well. Let us know what you think. If you want to hit us up, you can do so on Twitter at MyBCSN1. The number 1 is where you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and on Facebook. Or you can send us personal tweets. A.D. Drew, you can find him at BCSN Drew. You can find me at DRB365. Alvin's not on Twitter, so you can't harass Alvin. You have to harass Alvin's comments through us, and maybe we'll share them, but I doubt it. But because he's a Hall of Famer, and we don't have the right to harass a Hall of Famer. So
that's right.
All right, so that's going to do it. Thank you for watching and listening. Again, MEACsports.com. Go to the 50th anniversary page. That's where you can look at all this information, the 50 greatest moments, look at the all-time football team list, and you can select your 50 players out of 149. We will break them all down. The next show, again, we'll be talking quarterbacks and special teams, and then our third show, we'll get into the defensive guys. So for our guest, Hall of Famer Alvin Hollins, and my partner, A.D. Drew, I'm Brian Fulford. Thanks for watching and listening to the BCSN Sports Wrap on the Black College Sports Network. Peace out.
I'll holla.
But you stay hard.